about why I struggle to pray the way I want to. So I just want to open with, we've looked at the preparation according to the author of the text as the things to take in consideration, Edwin Crozier. I wanted to call him C.W. Crozier the other day, and I don't know where I got that even. Edwin Crozier. Like I said, I reached two general conclusions about dissatisfaction with the way I pray. And one of them there's really a third. One of them has been developing over the last several months. Just looking at my life and realizing that I need to change the way I approach God in prayer. And I'll tell you that the general realization that's come to me over the last several months is my prayers need to be less about me and more about others. And that my focus needs to be on addressing my attention to petitioning God for the people that I care about, rather than complaining about my own circumstances. And yet a lot of the Psalms kind of sound like complaining about your own circumstances. Many of them do, and I don't know if complaining is the right word, but focusing on your own circumstances and petitioning God. And we're seeing that too in these examples. I think I need to turn outward more. And I think that's related to one of my other general points here. We can try to get through all of Psalms 119 and we'll just read it and that's all we'll get done this morning. So again, you need to do work on this before we get here. The preparation. What do you think this lesson focused on in terms of preparation? Was it the proper bending of the knee and the closing of the eyes and the bowing of the head? Have you heard people say that you can't pray unless your head is bowed? I remember hearing things like that before in years past. And I think that's ridiculous. I pray while driving. And I'm not closing the eyes. I pray while driving. And I think for me, that is at least a time to get away from some of the other things that I've got going on in my head. And I'll use time that way. So what kind of preparation was being addressed here or focused on in this lesson? What kind of preparation? Yes, ma'am.
Preparation of your heart, be the kind of person that you should be in touch with God.
Yeah. A preparation of the heart. So is this preparation unique to prayer?
It's unique to your life if you're a Christian.
Yeah. It seems though the lesson is focusing on sort of a general Christian living attitude and preparation, more so than specifically to prayer. So is that the best way to approach this topic? Of prayer.
Can you repeat your question?
Focusing, Margaret's comments were to the preparation was sort of Christian living overall altogether. And I said, is that the best way to approach the topic of preparing to pray? Is talking sort of in a more broad sense of what's your life like? Do you think that's the valid way to do this, or is there a better approach to it?
My thought on preparing is, we see the psalmist able to approach God in prayer when they're in a variety of conditions. They may be confident in their standing with God. They may not be. And so, I guess what I initially thought of more was the preparation is the being very intentional about who we are approaching and why we are approaching God. Sort of the content of the lessons that we've been having so far is teaching ourselves who we are addressing when we are praying to God, and sort of who we are and what are the reasons why we pray. And I think coming to God with the purpose behind our prayer, and maybe even
And you qualified your answer 2 times, and that's okay.
Qualified a lot of answers.
Well, I'm a little confused about this too, because as I think about the instructions I perceived as I went through this lesson, in some respect they had nothing to do with prayer, but in another aspect they do. And Andrew, I think, touched on one of those conflicts in my thoughts was preparing your life for prayer, but also preparing your thoughts for what it is you want to approach God about. And as Andrew said, sometimes you sort of slam it out there and you don't know what is going to come of it as well. But that goes to this point of Christian living altogether, is that sometimes things go according to plan and sometimes they don't. Sometimes you feel like your life's objectives are being met by your pursuit. And sometimes you feel like the harder you thrash in the water, the more you're drowning. Do you feel that way? Or am I the only one who feels like that? Get your head up and talk to me this morning, because I'm trying to figure out why I struggle to pray the way I want to. I'm trying to figure that out, and I'm asking you to help me.
I think too, like, I know this is true for me. I think sometimes we put maybe too much expectation on ourselves as far as prayer life goes, and I think we forget sometimes to just be ourselves with God because He already knows.
Okay. So I think there's a sense of authenticity, which goes to the point Andrew made earlier about sometimes you pray when you're in distress, sometimes you pray when you're in joy, sometimes you pray when you're in sadness, sometimes you pray because we feel all those things. And one thing that I've observed that I don't know that I've observed before myself is I feel emotions that are seemingly contradictory at the same time, where I can feel joy and sadness, where I can feel hope and discouragement, where I can feel like my service to God is what I want it to be, and then feel like I'm also falling short, woefully short, at the same time. And I'm not trying to describe a psychotic episode. I'm trying to describe the fact that life is complex. And that prayer, I think, needs to reflect that complexity. You come.
Relax. It's okay.
Are you talking to me right now in class, or are you meaning in general?
Relax. It's okay. It's God. He knows us.
Yes.
So we can talk to God. He knows our hearts. So we can say, oh, I flub up all the time. It's okay. God knows us. So trying to put it in words, sometimes you can pray in your head. It's okay to do that. You can go in your quiet place to have quietness and focus. You can pray that you get home okay behind the wheel of the car, but it's okay. Relax. Don't get so relaxed in the car though you're driving.
So don't overthink it too. This is a conversation. And it's a two-way conversation. And that's the part too, I think, that is hard to grasp. This isn't just me on a podium standing with the spotlight down from heaven, and it's your turn, and you talk to God, and then He says next, and then He hears the next prayer. It's a two-way conversation. There has to be room for God to talk to us through prayer too. And I think maybe that idea of relaxing and being in the moment of the prayer, so that you're open to allowing God's warmth to come to you, and peace and comfort, which can happen through prayer. Andrew.
You stole the thought exactly that I was having, which is that prayer is not a speech. You said we're not on a podium, because the feeling that
I always come back to Andrew, who just spoke, an example from him when he was a homeschool student. He brought a math problem to Mom, and Mom, this has been really bothering me. We're working on this problem, and he talks through the whole problem. And Allison tells me when she's relaying this story to me, she says, I have no idea what he's doing. I'm teaching this math subject, but he's really teaching himself. And he talks himself through the whole problem, and he goes, oh, well, if I tried this, I could probably make this work. And, well, this probably means this. Oh, thanks, Mom, you helped me a lot. And Allison just kind of shrugged her shoulders and said, okay, go forth and conquer. She said, I didn't have one thing to say. But the conversation itself was Andrew's means of working through the problem. I'm not saying God is a dead ear to our conversation, but that is part of our preparation, is we have to be able to talk to ourselves honestly, with authenticity, in order to speak to God with honesty and authenticity. And I think part of that preparation is, as I looked at these examples, I saw examples of people who were really focused on being authentic with themselves in the state of mind they were in, given the circumstances they were in. Circumstances do not dictate our state of mind in a direct, linear fashion. We can choose to be joyful when things are not so happy around us. We can choose to have hope and promise when we, with our eyes, cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel. But those things are influences, they're factors in how we are open with ourselves and authentic with ourselves. And I think that's one of the more important elements of preparation for prayer, because God already knows, as has been pointed out, my state of mind. He knows what I'm struggling with. He knows where I've had successes that I have celebrated. And I've got to talk to myself with that same tone of appreciating what's going on around me right now and appreciating where I am and what's going on right now. And that takes reflection, and that takes the ability to stop lying to yourself about who you are, the nature of yourself. I tend to want to see myself as more better than I am. In a lot of ways. I don't like to see my raw edges, and I don't like to see my failures. But I think you see that in prayer, you have the psalmist opening up and saying, I need you to know, God, how I have forgotten that you are walking with me even when I'm in the midst of troubles, and you still have my hand in your life. I just don't see it right now. And I think if we can speak to ourselves in that way and say, my struggle with this sin is real, and I know I'm not where I want to be, but I'm working on it. And I need your help, God, and I need to open up to you. Yes, sir.
That's Psalm 1. I don't think it's a prayer. I think it's describing a person's life who never ceases to pray.
A person's life who never ceases to pray. I agree. Did you find the first psalm was a prayer? I did, myself. I know Jeff has taught this before, and he sees a progression here of the one who does not walk, the one who does not stand, and then the one who does not sit in sinful nature, the seat of the scornful, or scoffers, the counsel of the wicked. You don't go near it, you don't walk with it, you don't stand with it, you don't take your position, and then you don't sit in it. You don't just become comfortable with the scoffers. And he sees that as a progression. But the solution in the psalmist here is to delight in God's law and meditate in it day and night. my stand, my walk, my seat. I see commitment. I see a life that is in surrender. I said there were two general themes. The first general theme I saw is that preparing to pray requires a life that is in surrender. And surrendering to God is not when I agree with the law of God in 95% of my life and I give into that and I hold 5% back for me. And that's what I see myself doing. I give God a measure, but there's parts of me that I don't want to release and give to God because they're mine. And I think in general, I saw this idea of 100% release, 100% commitment, instead of trying to keep part of my person back and saying, give me this one little square of my heart that's just for me to be as foreboding or corrupt or as whatever as I want it to be, because I've given you everything else. And I think that hurts my prayer. I'm sure it does. There's a section here that says the psalmist prepared to pray by living God's word. I want to look at the 26th Psalm. I found it was maybe confusing to some of us. Maybe you got it better than I did when I first looked at it. Psalms 26:1 says, in New American Standard at least, "Vindicate me, O Lord, for I have walked in my integrity, and I have trusted in the Lord without wavering. Examine me, O Lord, and try me. Test my mind and my heart, for thy loving kindness is before my eyes, and I have walked in thy truth." And so, in Crozier's book, he kind of wants us to draw from Psalms 26 and Psalms 66 and Psalms 130, but then ask the question about, in the question number 7 on page 20, so do we have to be perfectly sinless before we can pray? So let's look at 130 here real quick. Psalms 130 in verse 3. And then see if we can answer that question, or see how you answer that question. Start that. Psalms 130 and verse 3. Verse 1. "Out of the depths I have cried to thee, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let thine ears be attentive to the voice of my supplications. If thou, Lord, shouldst mark iniquities, O Lord, who could stand?" So then, two seemingly contradictory points. Does the psalmist believe that only the perfectly sinless can pray? What did you take from Psalms 130 regarding that idea? Let's see what your answers are for that one. He says, if you'd mark my iniquities, who could stand? What do you think the psalmist is saying by that, first of all?
I think it's just that they're recognizing the holiness of God, and that they can't measure up to that. I don't think it's necessarily what they're saying they get to be sinless and don't pray, but rather that come to God in a spirit of humility because He's holy. I think that's what is being recognized there.
Okay, so you didn't imply from that only sinless people can pray to God, and I didn't either. Any other thoughts around that verse?
It's saying if someone's perfect, or if no one's perfect, so no one could pray.
Well, I agree with that conclusion. If there would be no prayers if we're waiting for perfect people only to pray. And so that seems to answer it enough right there, but let's explore this a little bit more. Does that verse say that, I guess I interpret it differently than the author did here, is I read that as, who could stand before you? It's not who can stand before you, it's who can stand before you unjustified. And God's the one that's going to justify me. But I can't approach God as if I don't need justification. So, to the point of, the perfect are the only ones that can pray. Well, if I think I'm perfect, I'm probably disqualifying my prayers reaching God. Because what I need for perfection is justification, forgiveness of God. I need His action on my life before I can approach Him in prayer. Not my sinlessness, because that's an impossibility. But the thought that I'm sinless, the thought that I'm perfect, I think will hinder my ability to pray effectively. Because I've not done that life's examination we've been talking about. I haven't done that reflection on my own heart. I've not been honest with myself. If I approach God and say, you got the full package in me, right?
Well, not only are you not being honest with yourself, you're also not being honest with God either. You can't be dishonest with yourself and honest with God, or vice versa.
Yeah. I don't know who we have to break down in front of first. But if you don't accomplish both, you're not honest for God, you're not honest for yourself, I think you're going to struggle. I saw another hand, Chet.
Greg, I think we go to verse 4, which follows that. But with you there is forgiveness.
Right.
That you may fear and wait on the Lord. My soul waits, and in His word I hope. So that shows us there that God has the ability to forgive us of our sins if we can stand pure enough to approach Him in prayer.
Yeah.
It's not that we're perfect, but God doesn't remember those sins, and He counts us as perfect.
Yeah, vindication is to be, going back to Psalms 26, is to be declared to be innocent. If I've been vindicated, that's when a courtroom or a judge has made a ruling. And I've been vindicated. I've been declared innocent. Am I innocent? No. I've been declared to be innocent. And there is a difference. People get off on technicalities. We all get off on a technicality, in so many words, and the technicality is God's love for His creation. So He vindicates us. But what the psalmist says in chapter 26, I think, unless someone else wants to tell me, how is it that he can approach God in prayer? Because he's sinless? No. Because he's been vindicated. Why then, in Psalms 26, does the psalmist ask to be judged of God? Why does he say, I'm ready to stand up to your scrutiny? Why does he say that? Because he knows his sins are beyond his measure to forgive by his actions, or to not commit by his actions. So why does he say, I want to stand up to your scrutiny? Isn't that what he's saying here in Psalms 26? Examine me, verse 2, O Lord, and try me, test my mind and my heart.
Well, I think he's asking God to show him what, because obviously God knows our hearts better than we do. So I think he's asking God to show him any way in his heart that's not what it should be, perhaps.
Okay. Andrew?
Yeah, I find Psalm 130 I find a lot easier to relate to. Who can survive with God counting our sins against us? That I can really identify with. It's Psalm 26 that is a much harder psalm for me, because similarly to when we read Job again most recently in our reading together, I found myself really having a hard time taking Job's side. And a lot of the things Job would say, I thought I could, like, man, this guy's way too sure of himself.
Yeah.
And so I struggled reading through that, and I struggle with this too. The thing that I guess stood out to me is at the end of the psalm in verse 11, he's talking about I have integrity so that I can pray. But then in verse 11 he says, I have integrity, rescue me and have mercy on me. Well, if he's saying he's sinless, if he's saying he's so good that God needs to listen to him, why then is he asking for rescuing and for mercy? So he's not negating the need still for a stay of justice when it comes to use the kind of the courtroom example. I don't remember the term now, but when the accused shows a genuine remorse and shows a change of heart, a change of character, that can soften the judge's assessment of what kind of punishment they
Mitigating circumstances.
What was that?
Mitigating circumstances
Okay.
is used in the courtroom.
Didn't remember the term there from a courtroom, but I think that's what I see here is if you take the entire psalm and read it all, and all the way to the end, he's saying, I've received rescuing, I've received mercy, and I'm trying to show a changed heart and trying to show integrity of my character because I know I've received that, and I know I continue to need that.
Okay.
And in that case, I guess I need to change the way I'm viewing it as it's not boastful and it's not a self-assurance. It's just it's an acknowledgement to God that this is what I'm trying to do because of what you've done. He doesn't use the word try, and I think if the word try was in here, it would really help me read the psalm much more easily.
Okay, you're getting it. You're getting it. I think Andrew is right on target with this. Not just because I agree with him, but as you read the psalm, he's acknowledging his need for mercy, but he's asking for God to go ahead and test his heart. Because he's not asking to be tested for a measure of his perfect sinless nature. He's asking to be tested for the quality of character that he has and his devotion to serving God, even though he knows he's going to fail on occasion. The psalmist says, in my integrity, I'm always going to try. The word is not there. But it's not try to be sinless. It's try to be true to my nature of loving God with a pure character. And I think that's part of my struggle with this preparation. And what I said about holding back part of my heart, if I give 100% of my devotion to God and my heart to God, and I still sin, I know I have a faithful God who will forgive me. But if I'm saying in my integrity and in my character, I'm carving out a little bit for myself to keep as a secret sin, then I have failed the test in Psalms 26 of saying, God, measure the integrity of my heart. And I want you to judge me for the quality of my character. And I'm willing to stand on that. And I think Job was willing to stand on that. And that's why Job is hard to understand too, for me. And I agree. I read Job and I go, man, he's really saying this is unfair. And I don't find myself sympathetic with Job as well. But Job was saying, and I think he was consistent with the message here. He was saying, Lord, I know I'm not perfect, but in everything I've done, I have always given you 100% of what I can do. And sometimes 100% is not enough. Sometimes 100% isn't just not enough. If I have 600 kids in my house and I got a quarter cup of rice and a quarter cup of dry beans and we're going to have a big, wonderful dinner, 100%, if we cook it all, it's not enough. It's not going to feed the bellies. But it may be the best I've got. It may be all I can do right then. And that's God's mercy and that's God's patience. If I'm doing 100% of what I can do right now where I am, what more do I have to sacrifice? What more do I have to give? Will God not be happy and appreciative of that sacrifice if I'm giving 100% of my heart as opposed to 100% of my whatever else, wealth or flowery words when I pray, or 100% of my looking like I'm living the part of a Christian, but I really don't feel comfortable in my life as a Christian? And is that the preparation that I think the psalmist is trying to get us to understand? Our prayers are hindered when our lives are not in alignment to where we can stand before God in prayer and say, Lord, I know I'm not asking you to measure me on whether I am perfect and sinless or not, but I am willing to stand before you and say, judge my character, judge my integrity.
That shows too that, like I said before, that kind of attitude shows that you're willing to see your own faults, no matter how bad they might, and that you want to be shown them so that you can work with them. I mean, why else would you ask something like that?
I mean, wallowing in your own faults is not a positive endeavor, but acknowledging them so that you can address them, so that you can work towards improving them, is important. And as we said, God already knows these things anyway. And so when the psalmist, even when he says, Lord, judge you by the integrity of the heart, that's already the standard God has said he's going to use anyway. He knows we're not sinless, perfect creatures. That's already the measure. And so I think Andrew, in his final comments, were, we need to know that. We need to understand that. And we need to live like we understand that. We need to appreciate that when I think I don't want to pray because I don't feel like I've done right, the psalmist would say, well, did you do the best you could?
I think that's where we get tripped up too. I think we think we have to be perfect, rather than thinking that we just do the best we can.
And doing the best you can is never an excuse for doing less than you can. It's doing with what you have right now. And sometimes some of our resources that will have been in abundance at one stage of my life will be short later. And sometimes some of the things that were lacking when we were younger will be in greater abundance when we're older. Because life is a river, and we keep on floating, 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 and we keep changing. We never stay the same. Never stay the same. We never stay the same. And our impression of ourselves needs to reflect the real me instead of the me that was 20 years ago or whatever. And I need to develop this mindset that as we discuss here, preparation, it's a love for God and a love for His will for mankind. The psalmist uses a lot of words like loving the law of God, loving the pages, the precepts. It all sounds very much like grabbing one of the Indiana code books off my shelf and going to Title 32 and flipping through that. So I love the law, and no one wants to read Indiana code. It's confusing, it's dry, it's boring, it's tedious. But behind all of the pages, and God's law is nowhere near as voluminous as man's law in terms of what's written down. But regardless of the pages, it's not the point of, I just love thumbing through these, codes and ordinances and manifest and all of this. I love that God has a purpose for me and that He shares what that purpose is. I love that God has intentions for me and has plans for me, and He's willing to share what He thinks those plans look like in my life. I love that God values integrity and justice and fairness and mercy and kindness and love and peace and joy. I love that God values all these things. And He shares it with me. That's how I want to read when I see the psalmist writing about the law of God. That's how I want to read that these days. is not think in terms of you shall this and you shall not that. Those things govern my life. But what I want to really appreciate and say, when I have that submission through desire to serve God, it's because I love the nature of God. And I love that He shares His nature with us. I love that He is true. I love that He is forgiving. I love that He has high expectations, but that He's also merciful. I love that His ideas and His thoughts are above mine. And I need to appreciate that I don't always understand and follow what He's got to say to me sometimes. And I might get it later. Yes, sir.
And also when you look at it, the simplicity of God's law, because He boils it down to where there's only two principles. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbors yourself. Unlike the Indiana and the United States law, where there's this and this exception and this workaround and this trouble, and when you look at the law of God from that standpoint, how does that fit in those two? It makes it so much easier to accept and understand.
Yeah. I mean, I probably broke 3 Indiana statutes on the way here this morning. There's so many things written down and so many convoluted ways to... I won't even go into a bill we discussed on the floor this week regarding squatters and homes, vacant homes. It's nuts, the conversation we had over that bill. And many others. So man's logic and man's intelligence is futile, and that's part of the problem we have. You know, if you print it all out, Indiana code, that's just Indiana. No, that's not even going to federal code. Just the Indiana code is a good 6 or 7 feet wide on the bookshelf in printed form. Other thoughts this morning? I've been rambling, so feel free to ramble, okay? I don't know if I've been rambling. I'm just trying to hit the general themes of this lesson. You're going to have to do the work of the preparation. Just like we're talking about preparation for prayer, you're going to have to do the work for preparation so we can talk about the bigger themes and the bigger ideas and the takeaways from what we're looking at together. Anyone else have any takeaways that they want to share or indulge us with? What are you grinning at?
Well, I do, but I want to give other people.
All right, give other people a chance, please. I'm a little biased. I like my son's insights, so I'm willing to take his, but... Anyone else?
I like his insights too.
Oh, okay. Going?
I'll share that.
All right, Andrew, share.
The word that I'm thinking of is devotion. And as we've been talking about this integrity, I started thinking about the word devotion. And to me, devotion is that you're determined that whatever level of contribution you have, it's going to be committed. So having devotion means my abilities could change later. I could become much more weakened or bereft of ability than I am now. But when that happens later, it'll still be devoted. Or if I suddenly come upon great fortune and a great excess and strength in my life, devotion says I'm not going to turn around and say, yes, I finally got what I was waiting for, and now it's time to spend it on me. So I know many times Brace would give lessons, and when I was a lot younger, I remember this well. He would talk about the idea of deciding ahead of time how you're going to react to the kinds of things that could upend your life, or the kinds of things that could be a betrayal or could be a pain later. And rather than thinking, well, that's never going to happen, and then being lost when it does, the preparation of devotion says, I don't have to make the decision once it happens because I've already made the decision. Whatever the ability is going to be, it's going to be devoted to integrity, and so that helps me in viewing integrity not as this high pedestal standard of perfection, but it's whatever rung on the ladder you're at, it's still the purpose that it's going to be directed toward.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary thought here too. You know, David, when he was in the cave and praying to God for deliverance, he didn't really look like a future king too much at that point in his life. And yet his commitment was, I'm still that same person of character, even though I don't have the ability to exercise that in ways that I would like to, any more than Paul when he said, I'm in these chains. You think about his devotion of character. What would Paul have been doing had he not been imprisoned? Well, he would have been doing the work of God. What did he do because he was imprisoned? He was doing the work of God. His circumstances didn't dictate his proven character or his devotion to giving whatever he could give to God. And what he could give at that point was pen and paper.
He said he learned to abound and to know need.
Yeah. And in all circumstances, he found contentment in abounding or being in great need because he always gave it to God. Okay. Thank you for your participation this morning.